Violence in Britain that is only getting worse.
Indeed, for the first time since the rioting and looting started over the weekend, it has spread outside London to other.
In just under 19 minutes, an estimated 87,000 individuals poured into central London. Over the same week, 6 knife attacks, 3 sexual assaults, 2 attempted bombings outside major transport hubs, and more than 2,400 illegal arrivals. This represents the sharpest spike recorded under Prime Minister Keir Starmer's tenure. Emergency departments are overrun, police units stretched beyond capacity, and for the first time in modern British history, London's Central Command has issued a severe structural failure alert. As the United Kingdom wrestled with escalating disorder, a voice echoed from across the Atlantic, not soft, not diplomatic, but unmistakably prescient. Former U.S. President Donald Trump, in a tone more warning than boastful, reminded the world of his stance. A nation without a border is a nation without a future. Events this week lent weight to that warning. Before we break down how the UK unraveled in just 7 days, this report is for those disillusioned by platitudes and political evasions, those who demand the facts and seek clarity amid the noise. The crisis didn't erupt suddenly. It crept in, as many disasters do, quietly. By noon yesterday, 600 illegal arrivals had already been logged. That number surged to 900 more by late afternoon. By dusk, the total had doubled again. According to Border Force officials, the UK coastline had effectively become a conveyor belt of unregulated entries. Local councils, already at capacity, issued urgent pleas for support. The Home Office remained silent. Hotels were overflowing, classrooms were full, GP clinics began turning patients away. By midnight, one internal government report issued a chilling summary: "We have lost control." The following evening, the nation responded with speed and force. In a span of just 19 minutes, tens of thousands marched toward Westminster. Scotland Yard initially flagged it as a possible systems error. It wasn't. The country had reached a breaking point. Demonstrators flooded districts like Paddington, Kensington, and Cutton, targeting hotels converted into emergency housing by the Starmer administration. Flares lit the sky. Barricades were overturned. Police lines collapsed almost instantly. Emergency dispatch units radioed headquarters. "We cannot hold the perimeter." And then came what many now call the darkest night in recent memory. 6 knife attacks occurred across London, 3 near schools, 2 at train stations, and 1 outside a grocery store. All 4 suspects arrested had reportedly entered the country illegally within the past 18 months. Downing Street offered no statement. Press inquiries were met with a brief "no comment" at this time. The next morning brought an even more sobering development. 2 homemade explosive devices were discovered at separate London transport hubs, both disabled mere minutes before potential detonation. Investigators later confirmed a disturbing link. Both bombs had been constructed using blueprints circulated in encrypted messaging groups frequented by recent arrivals. Yet still, no national address, no crisis briefing, no prime minister in sight. Meanwhile, the system faltered at every point. GP waitlists were suspended. Ambulances were rerouted. 3 boroughs declared operational failure. London's command center activated its highest emergency protocol, normally reserved for terrorist attacks or natural disasters. And yet again, leadership remained absent. As Britain grappled with what is now being described as a systemic unraveling, the United States was heading in a markedly different direction. President Trump, deep into his second-wave border initiative, moved decisively, freezing multiple asylum pathways, expanding vetting mechanisms, and authorizing military reinforcement along key border zones. These weren't symbolic actions, they were operational shifts, and they were producing results. In contrast, Starmer's government insisted the situation remained under control, even as internal reports painted a different picture. Border enforcement capacity, according to official sources, had collapsed by 41%. 2 nations, 2 leaders, 2 philosophies, and now 2 divergent realities playing out on the world stage. For years, Donald Trump issued the same warning to European governments: if you don't defend your border, you will eventually lose control of your country. It was dismissed in polite circles, laughed off, mocked, treated as political theater. But this week, Britain stopped laughing. illegal arrivals surged beyond 2,400 in just 5 days, and behind closed doors, the Home Office quietly admitted what officials would not say publicly. There was no more hotel space, no viable temporary accommodation left, and not enough frontline staff to process what was coming in. Across the Atlantic, the picture looked markedly different. Under Trump's tightened border framework, arrivals reportedly fell sharply. That contrast, one system straining past its limits, the other deliberately restricting flow, became one of the clearest data-driven divides in the Western world. This wasn't a debate about tone or ideology, it was a comparison of outcomes. Every national crisis has an accelerant, something that turns strain into fracture. In Britain, that accelerant was silence. Prime Minister Keir Starmer declined to deliver a national address, even as London reeled from knife attacks and attempted bombings. And when a government goes quiet during a public security shock, the problem is not just fear. It is the vacuum that follows, filled instantly by speculation, distrust, and rumor. People began asking what the government would not answer directly. Is the state overwhelmed, under-resourced, or simply unwilling to confront the scale of what is happening? Inside Westminster, MPs were reportedly murmuring that the Prime Minister looked exhausted, uncertain, and boxed in, avoiding key briefings, delaying decisions, and allowing the situation to escalate faster than the government's ability to respond. In political terms, this is what collapse looks like at the top. Not necessarily a dramatic resignation or a public breakdown, but a gradual disappearance of authority. Leadership didn't fail loudly, it faded. Polling captured the shift in real time. According to figures circulating this week, 71% of Britons now believe the government has lost control of national security. 64% say they fear crime linked to illegal migration. 58% support an immediate border shutdown. And trust in Starmer fell below 30% for the first time since his election. These are not small movements. They are the type of numbers that trigger panic inside party leadership meetings, because they indicate a collapse not just in popularity, but in perceived competence. At the same time, in the United States, Trump's approval among voters who prioritize border enforcement reportedly rose, reinforcing the political contrast. British analysts privately described it as humiliating, one country tightening its perimeter, projecting control, the other looking as though it is being pushed backwards by events it cannot manage. By Thursday, British broadcasters were running footage of American border operations, reinforced checkpoints, aerial surveillance, drones, and suspended asylum channels pending deeper vetting. That imagery landed in living rooms across London, Manchester, and Birmingham and provoked a blunt public question: why can't we do that? The most damning answer did not come from an opposition figure or a newspaper columnist. It came, reportedly, from inside Whitehall. We can't. The system is already broken. And that is the moment the country was forced to confront a reality it has long avoided. Britain wasn't merely lagging behind America on enforcement strategy. It was struggling to function as a coherent state under pressure, and doing so in full view of the world. By Friday afternoon, Whitehall was described as a command bunker under stress. Officials moved between offices at speed, phones rang without pause, analysts issued competing assessments. Security staff sealed corridors that had rarely, if ever, been restricted in modern times. In the Cabinet Office, advisors faced 3 words on internal screens that carried a cold finality: national capacity exceeded. Not a warning, a confirmation. 6 knife attacks, 3 sexual assaults, and 2 attempted bombings in a single week had pushed Britain's emergency response network past the boundary of resilience. And the immigration surge, in the government's own internal framing, was increasingly understood as the accelerant that turned existing strain into systemic overload. The system wasn't bending, it was beginning to splinter. A briefing circulated at senior levels laid out the scale of the damage in stark operational terms. Police response times reportedly up 62%. Emergency calls, Britain's equivalent of 911, showing 38,000 unanswered. Ambulance delays up 41%. 15 boroughs reporting critical degradation in service delivery. An estimated £312 million in economic disruption in just 5 days. And then, the line that no minister would ever want read aloud on camera: The illegal immigration surge was directly linked to 41% of emergency overload. The public was never meant to hear that sentence, but inside Whitehall, it hung in the air like a confession, because it implied what the government had resisted admitting openly. The state had allowed the pressure to exceed what its services, infrastructure, and enforcement capacity could sustain. And when that threshold is crossed, the politics changes. This stops being a question of messaging and becomes a question of national stability. Because once the public believes that government is no longer controlling events, only reacting to them, confidence collapses quickly. And when confidence collapses, disorder spreads faster than any official statement can contain it. That is where Britain now finds itself, with the facts moving rapidly, the institutions straining, and a leadership center that, at least in the eyes of a growing majority, has not communicated with the urgency or authority the moment requires. By Friday evening, the trend was no longer speculative. It was unmistakable. Each time Prime Minister Keir Starmer was expected to publicly address the escalating crisis, the scheduled briefing was either delayed or quietly dropped. Silence filled the vacuum. This wasn't political calculation. It wasn't defiance. It was paralysis. Inside Whitehall, civil servants reported a troubling pattern. The Prime Minister, they said, appeared drained, hesitant, and increasingly unwilling to face the unfolding reality. One advisor described him standing before a situation board for nearly 20 minutes without speaking, a head of government watching the numbers climb while viable options evaporated. Leadership didn't falter through poor choices. It faltered through absence. While senior officials debated wording, Britain's streets bore the weight of inaction. Parents kept children home after knife attacks near schools. Women avoided night buses following multiple reported sexual assaults. Commuters abandoned transport hubs rattled by attempted bombings. Hospitals, already strained, initiated emergency overflow procedures typically reserved for terrorist incidents. And as police redirected resources, some neighborhoods were left entirely without patrol coverage. The very people politicians are elected to protect, ordinary families, felt the breakdown first. And for many, it didn't feel like a sudden crisis. It felt hauntingly familiar. A nation shouldering more pressure than its systems were built to absorb. By late Friday, the breakdown had reached the core of government. Departments turned on each other. The Home Office blamed the Treasury for chronic underfunding. The Treasury pointed to the Ministry of Justice for failing to streamline legal proceedings. The MOJ, in turn, accused Border Force of losing track of thousands of new arrivals. And in the center of it all stood a prime minister unable or unwilling to bring fractured institutions back into alignment. One senior minister reportedly summed up the mood behind closed doors with brutal clarity. This isn't government anymore, it's triage. This crisis, then, was no longer confined to the streets. It had become institutional. Britain wasn't simply faltering in its response, it was failing at the very desks where solutions should have been drafted. By Saturday morning, just 6 days into what now ranks as one of the most turbulent weeks in recent political history, the government appeared on the edge of a deeper breakdown. Reinforcements were stretched thin. Local councils openly admitted collapse. Emergency services pleaded for operational relief. And behind the scenes, Whitehall quietly braced for the possibility that Sunday could bring an even greater wave of unrest. For the first time in years, Britain didn't resemble a nation struggling through challenge. It resembled a nation sliding, system by system, out of control. And those within government felt it. As this catastrophic week draws to a close, the country finds itself staring into a political and institutional mirror it can no longer avoid. The chaos did not erupt overnight. The panic wasn't spontaneous. The collapse was not triggered by one moment or one policy. It was the product of years of incremental denial, 1,000 ignored warnings. This was never just about immigration, or policing, or even one prime minister facing a crisis. This was about a nation stretched past the limits of its own infrastructure, an accumulation of strain across every system: border control, law enforcement, healthcare, education, emergency response. For years, the public was assured the borders are secure, the crime is contained, the migration figures are manageable, and public services can absorb the demand. But this week exposed a far more difficult truth. Britain didn't lose control all at once. It lost it slowly, through a combination of silence, delay, and miscalculation. And it did so in full view of the electorate. The most disturbing takeaway from this week is not the violence, nor the overwhelmed hospitals, nor even the near-miss bombings. It's this: that a modern Western government, with every tool of executive power at its disposal, spent the week reacting, not leading. Reality moved faster than Whitehall, and Whitehall blinked. That's a hard truth for any democracy. Not simply that a country may be unsafe, but that those entrusted to ensure its safety no longer appear capable of doing so. Tonight, as Britain braces for another unpredictable weekend, one question remains unanswered. If this is what a single week looks like, what will the next month bring? Because the numbers are not easing, the pressure is not declining, and the systems, from local councils to national courts to frontline hospitals, are cracking in real time. Britain is not yet in collapse, but it is at risk. And history shows us what happens when risk, once visible, is allowed to grow unchecked. Before we close tonight's report, we turn to you, the citizens who live with the consequences of these decisions. Do you believe the government is still in control, or has public confidence already fractured beyond repair? Your voice matters. In moments like this, it becomes more than feedback. It becomes part of the record. A record that may, in time, mark this week as the moment Britain's stability cracked open. If you believe these truths need to be heard, speak up, share, subscribe. Let's not allow this moment to disappear into silence.